Hello, I'm Ruth Malone. I'm editor-in-chief of the BMJ journal Tobacco Control. And in celebrating the 30th anniversary of the journal this year, we are honored to do some interviews with leading policymakers across the globe. And today I'm speaking with Dr. Verrall, who is an infectious disease physician and the New Zealand Associate Minister of Health. In 2021, she introduced a world-leading plan to reach the government's Smoke-Free 2025 goal, and we're very honored to be able to talk to her about this because there's so much interest globally in what New Zealand is doing. So, Dr. Verrall, thank you so much for making the time to be here with me. Let me just ask you first to say a bit about the plan for those who may not be familiar with it. It really is quite a package.
The action plan contains both regulatory and non-regulatory elements to really drive down our smoking rate to our goal of being smoke-free by 2025. We define smoke-free as having a 5% smoking prevalence across all the ethnicities in New Zealand, Māori, Pacifica and non-Māori. That's important to us because at this stage in our tobacco control journey, our smoking rate is just over 9%, but we have marked inequities between those ethnicities, so it's very important that we focus on addressing those as part of the plan. So we have a scale up of our stop smoking supports, as well as health promotion and community engagement work that's going on. That's our non-regulatory component, and one of the key parts of it that we've found through our COVID-19 response, as it happens, is the importance of community mobilisation for particularly driving good health outcomes in Māori and Pacific communities in New Zealand. On the regulatory side, we're going to take really bold action to back up those people working at the grassroots. Two key measures are markedly reducing the availability of tobacco in communities by restricting retail outlets. We estimate we have about 6,000 to 8,000 outlets in New Zealand. We'll drive that way down to somewhere around 500 or to 1,000, so there'll be a marked reduction. Secondly, we'll denicotinize or provide a regulatory framework for requiring the denicotinisation of tobacco, because we know that that it can be really effective in driving people to quit. Finally, we want to secure our progress towards our smoke-free goal for the future as well, beyond 2025. So we'll introduce a smoke-free generation policy, which means people who are 14 at the time the legislation passes will never legally purchase tobacco, and as they age, that generation, the legal purchase age will age with them. That's very important. We know that minimum purchase ages do have an impact, but that one will also sends a clear message that there is no safe age to start smoking tobacco. So we hope to secure our progress in tobacco control for the future as well through that.
Now, I think one of the brilliant things about that proposal in particular is the way it undermines the tobacco industry's positioning of tobacco as something you get to do when you get to be an adult, something that you would want to do, which is very exciting.
That's right. It removes the rite of passage element to these dangerous substances, and it is a unique retail product in that it kills half the people who use it. So it really should not be available for purchase.
It's so refreshing to hear policymakers putting forth such bold policies. I know in many countries there are people who would like to put forth such policies, but they haven't felt they had the political foundation or support to do so. But I'm wondering if, because tobacco control is a research journal and a journal of ideas about tobacco control policies, where in fact, a lot of the work about what's called the tobacco endgame has come out of New Zealand, some of the leading work. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how your policy proposal development and thinking has been influenced by research, either published in tobacco control or the role of research in developing policy.
Well, we're a small country of just 5 million people, so I think the research community, as well as every other part of the community, enjoys good access to politicians and policymakers in New Zealand. I think the other important part of our environment is that this issue of tobacco control has really had significance for Māori, the Indigenous people of New Zealand, and so there's been some important collaborations between the research community and Māori to elevate these issues. Our policy team at the Ministry of Health has good connections with academics of all backgrounds throughout the country. So yes, we had advice for developing these proposals on not only what the individual proposals were that might work for the tobacco endgame. In particular, the retail outlet reduction was an important focus of research in New Zealand, and there's significant research showing that that retail in New Zealand is retail density in communities is correlated with smoking rates. But then I think as it came to developing the actual action plan and what was in and out of the various different things that were proposed, we also turned to academic colleagues to ask them to model the impact of, or the projected impact of the policies. I came into government in 2020. We had only 5 years to get to reach our smoke-free goals, so whether I very strongly held the view that I needed to be able to say to the public, I think these are measures that can be implemented, and if implemented, we have it's realistic to expect to achieve the goal, and so having the research to back that up was important too.
I'm wondering, for people in other countries, as a policymaker, do you have any suggestions for researchers in terms of how to disseminate their research or make it more impactful or useful for policymaking?
I think, as always, politicians have to be translators. We have to be able to synthesize what we're hearing from communities of interest, be they in research or elsewhere, and then be able to provide a compelling message to the public. While I think it's very important that we get to hear the science from researchers, any thoughts on how that would land in the public is usually something that politicians are interested to hear. So, for example, we heard from our research community that the majority of smokers want to quit. We also had really good data on who current smokers in New Zealand are. We actually have achieved the smoke-free goal for our least deprived quintile, and we are close for the next least deprived quintile as well. That helps us understand, who are we trying to persuade when we're proposing policies and trying to get support for them in the public. And then the other final thing I'd say is just, I think as a progressive politician, I think a really important part of our policy making has to be demonstrating the feasibility of our plans, because a way in which our opponents can undermine our progress is to chip away at that feasibility. So any real world studies with the denicotinisation, we're pleased to know there are clinical trials of that. There are examples of countries that have raised the age of purchase. All of those things are very important for us to be able to make the case.
And do you see any other particularly important areas where research would be useful as we approach the tobacco endgame, either in New Zealand or elsewhere?
I think the precisely how to restrict retail availability is a tricky question, and we're going to have to take what is the evidence that there is and come up with pragmatic and functional laws in order to implement that. That was an area where we had to sort of cast ahead of what the research was, because these types of measures aren't so common. So I think that would be an interesting area for further exploration. Of course, the practicalities of how these smoke-free generation policies work, and no doubt there will be some who continue smoking despite the regulations that we put in place. So how would we best support them would become a focus for us after implementation of this plan too.
It just sounds like such a tremendous piece of work. And we're, as I said, the global tobacco control movement is very excited by what you're doing in New Zealand. And of course, there are other countries that have set endgame goals, but none really has this detailed and comprehensive policy proposal on the table to move to a smoke-free goal. So it's just tremendously exciting.
If I could just comment on that, I think it is important to understand just where in our journey New Zealand is, and that being at having a 9% smoking prevalence rate among adults puts us in a place where we are able to take these measures. So I appreciate other countries are at different points in their journey, and so that makes the proposals that we're planning are ones that can be taken in New Zealand as it is now, and we're eager to share our experience so others can learn from it as we go through.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your leadership, and we wish you every success in New Zealand, Dr. Verrall.
Thank you.